Tonight, I started things out a little bit on the earlier side. The sky was still blue, sun was just dropping down past the horizon, but the moon was up and bright. Um, so I figured I'd take a little bit of time to do some lunar sketching for the evening. Started out with the Astrotech 102 millimeter aperture telescope again for this evening. And just took a little bit of time in the beginning to explore, observing all around the moon, kind of just like enjoying seeing some of the craters. I played around with some different eyepieces and magnification, looking along the terminus of the shadow line from the sun, and then ended up deciding on focusing in on something. I wanted to play with something that maybe wasn't super contrasty, something that didn't have a crazy ton of craters all over the place to take up all the time. So I ended up figuring that this Eratosthenes Crater would be a good one to play with. Just really primarily focusing on the main central crater and surrounding ridgeline. It looked like there's sort of like these mountainy ranges surrounded by big flat fields, which seemed like it'd be fun to play around with. I also knew that I wanted to use pen for this drawing and play around with a little bit of the cross-hatching style for it. So a little bit less on the photo accuracy thing and a little bit more on the, I don't know, cartoony vibe, I guess, in a way. But to start things out, just taking my time plotting out some of the primary features with this black charcoal pencil, just to make sure that I had some reference points to go off of while I'm sketching down with the pen, since there isn't a whole lot of ability to adjust things quite as easily with the pen. I wanted to make sure that I got at least sort of a general blueprint underneath before moving forward with it. I don't know a whole lot about Eratosthenes, so actually I know barely nothing. All I can say is that looking at my moon app here, it looks like he was a Greek astronomer and geographer around 276 to 196 BC. Apparently that's from Wikipedia. Well, one of the things that I found really interesting looking at this crater and the surrounding area in the beginning of the night was that it felt like there wasn't a whole lot of really sharp defining shadow features. It was a little bit more subtle in general. Only around the western edge of the crater, which I'm kind of sketching out here, well, the left side of the crater here, had some more defined shadowy areas. Um, but for the most part, it was like, yeah, there was gradation, but there wasn't like black in the areas. And then it had these cool three little mountainy dots in the center there. So I'm starting this sketch out with just putting in the highlights within the crater itself. Trying to define the general shape primarily, with the cross hatching all going in the same direction. I don't know. I find that there's an appeal to kind of just keeping everything in the same direction in terms of the cross hatching, almost like it was, I don't know, printed out on a computer that had only one axis of line drawing. So as I continued out here, I'm also just defining some of the whiter areas. I find personally that sketching the moon, I haven't done it a whole lot, but maybe the half dozen to dozen times or so that I have done it, when I sketch on black paper, it feels a little bit more awkward just because I'm finding that I'm putting in so much white to try and build up to what I'm seeing. Eventually, I may end up doing a few more experiments and trying to play around with sketching lunar stuff on white paper instead. So yeah, just continuing to get the general areas of white now into the surface. That the bottom area, um, those lines were kind of delineating a bit of a mountainous range as well as what I just sketched out there. But this kind of stuff here that I'm sketching, that's a little more just kind of the white, the highlights on the surface of the flatter planes. There's also this sort of range that kind of arcs upwards through that I had marked out with the black charcoal and just defining out some of the highlight areas where the sun is hitting along that range. I like going back and forth a little bit, trying to figure out compositions going along as well. That's one of the things that in the few sketches that I have done on the lunar surface, it's been tricky for me to define the composition as well as I would want to. I feel like it's 50-50. Sometimes it really works out and sometimes it doesn't. So slowing the video back down to regular speed here just to show a little bit of this cross-hatching for the overall surface of the moon. This area that I'm shading in here right now was really a pretty flat plane, and it had some subtle delineation between dark and light. So I figured a nice way of kind of approaching this would be to just mark in where the light shaded areas are fairly gently if I could, and then knowing that eventually I have to kind of lighten everything up to kind of get it into the place of what the planet's surface looks like, which I'm starting to do here now so changing the direction of my lines and then just going over everything and trying to keep a little more of an even consistency of it for the shading in. It's not working super great. My pen was having a bit of a hard time with evenness, and I was having a hard time just getting it all out evenly through there. So I shortened down my strokes a little bit into a more narrow range, and that seemed to work a little bit better in terms of trying to get what I was looking for. It meant that I was going to have a little bit more of a texture, like a patchwork texture kind of thing with all these different sections going in, but figured, well, it's better than just having these big blotchy messes around. So I continued in that way for the rest of the sketch here. Overall, it was starting to work out fairly well. The area around the crater, which is what I was really focusing on, was beginning to get defined in terms of the light and dark, kind of the way that I wanted it to be, which was nice. I am starting to realize now, though, that there's compositionally, just in terms of the whole page, it felt a little bit funky. There's I did a whole bunch of different chicken scratchings of different sections of the areas around the crater at the beginning, and wasn't quite sure how to meld all this stuff together. Regardless, focusing still back on the primary crater itself, I switched over to a black pen. I've got this acrylic black pen here, which works really well for drawing over the gel ink and just helping to define some of those darker, more the blacker shadows. I did also notice too at this point, I mean, every time I sketch the moon, I always feel like I'm surprised by how much the shadow changes over the course of 30, 45 minutes to an hour. And so a lot of these shadows that I was just drawing in with that black pen didn't feel like they were there originally. But anyway, switching back to the white pen here, just getting a little bit more of the specificity of the shading in here throughout, and defining, getting that definition back in for those little mountains in the middle, and starting to plot out a couple of the smaller craters and divots within the mountain ranges that I was noticing. It's kind of nice. This is one of those times where a lot of the times when I'm using black, I wish that it was a little bit more consistent in terms of the blackness of the page. But there is something about this black acrylic on the white when I'm doing lunar sketches that I really do sort of enjoy seeing it pop out a little bit more from the page. Here I'm just doing a little bit of cross hatching with the black pen as well, just to get a little more definition. Oh, okay, so here switching back to the black charcoal, I was realizing that just the overall composition felt a little bit funky. There was just, I don't know what was going on here. I was doing so much of the early chicken scratch to just get in some of the basic features that I wasn't really paying too much attention to what the overall aesthetic of the look was going to be. So I was trying to like kind of darken out some of the areas and create a little bit of like an overall compositional form, which didn't feel like was working. So switching back to the black pen here and doing some kind of like cross hatching in a different direction to help try and define some of the shaping and fade out a little bit of like the starkness of where the white was. And I think in general, it kind of turned out, feels to me like overall the sketch is a little bit muddled in terms of the composition. But at the same time, I also feel like, well, you know, it's kind of nice playing around a little bit with seeing if I could get it back into form. Getting a few more of those little craters in. I'm just going back and forth with the eyepiece and the sketch, just to finding a few more of these specific mountain ranges and things like that I'm seeing on the sky, and then kind of called it a night at that point. Overall, yeah, it was a nice experiment. I enjoyed playing around with the moon again. I definitely want to kind of come back and explore some lunar sketching a bit more and just keep working on my chops with it all. But comparing it, the nice thing about the moon is you can also take photographs pretty easily with a camera just up to the eyepiece. And taking a picture of that and comparing them together, I am pretty happy with the overall feel of what it is. I think that it generally got what I was looking for in terms of the amount of specificity that I was hoping for. As I was finishing off the sketch for the night and finishing up looking back and forth between the page and the eyepiece, I looked up at the moon in the sky and realized that there was a really bright dot just above the moon, like brighter than any of the stars should be at that point. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Moved the telescope over and then spotted Saturn in conjunction right there, about a half a degree away from the moon, which was really exciting because I hadn't anticipated this. Like, it wasn't something that was on my radar in terms of stuff that was happening for the night. So that was really fun and exciting to see as sort of just like a nice little surprise, and I figured I'd draw out a quick little sketch of it. The sketch is not quite accurate. I mean, Saturn was definitely not, it was maybe half that size in relationship to the moon. But I would say that that sketch is 100% perfect in terms of how I felt when I saw it. It felt like pretty stellar, no pun intended.